Kubernetes security point of view, 11th topic is OS level security domain with the pod security policies. So I'm in a training.linuxfoundation.org CKS syllabus, and if you scroll down, right, and minimize microservice vulnerabilities, which is a 20% marks, set up appropriate OS level security domains using PSP, which is nothing but pod security policies, which is a short form of pod security policy, which is a short form, and OPA, open policy agent, and security context. So let's look at the what is PSP, which is pod security policies. So we know Kubernetes cluster means worker nodes, master node, which is called as a control plane, where control plane will have a controller manager, API server, and a scheduler, and etcd. Etcd is a key value database. So whenever you do like by using kubectl, you apply a deployment or something, ultimately it will store in the etcd. First it will go to API call and then ultimately store in etcd, right? So from whenever you trigger from kubectl apply a file of deployment or anything until the storing into the etcd, there is a first is authentication phase will happen. Authentication is nothing but what? Whoever the user is running, not the person. Here the person is this, I am running, I am Venkat, I am running. It's not a person here. It's a kubeconfig file who is a user. Say if this is a my, say kubectl config current context is I am running as a Kubernetes admin. kubectl config view, right? If you look at the current context is this guy, this is a Kubernetes admin, and who is the user? Kubernetes admin. And what the credentials I am using? This client certificate data and client key data. What is my API server? This is API server. So basically here, whoever is the user in the kubeconfig will get authentication phase happens, means whether it's a legitimate user or not. Then second is authorization, nothing but this particular user is able to perform deployment, whether he has a rights to deploy, he has a rights to deploy a config map, secret and all, right? Then third is admission controller will comes into the picture. This admission controller will validate this and it will does something. If applicable, then it will store into the etcd database. Now how the admission controller will work here? Because why we are talking about the admission controller? Because pod security policy is one of the admission controller. So here in the previous slide, this is the third phase, right? So let's consider authentication is successful and authorization is also successful. Then after that, what happened? In the admission controller, there are many more admission controllers in the Kubernetes. By default it comes. That's called a pre-built. When you install a Kubernetes, by default there are some bunch of admission controller will be there. Out of that, whatever the you enable, those will trigger. Then after that, mutating, validating controller also will trigger if you define. If it is not there, it won't trigger anything, right? Now as we said, admission controller, what are the built-in admission control? These are the admission controllers, always full and all these things. But here one of the admission controller is a pod security policy. Maybe you can ask why it is in the red color. Yes, these are the built-in admission controller. Out of that, image policy webhook, mutating and validating webhook, these are the dynamic admission controller, whereas rest of the things are built-in admission controller. Built-in in the sense, this is already developed by the Kubernetes. You can use if you require. If you require, you can use. You can just enable or disable. If you don't want to use, no problem. If you want to use, you have to add that one. So here, this is the what is the significance of this. Let's see. Pod security policy. As the name suggests, pod security policy. By the way, the documentation point of view, I have a GitHub page which is CKS preparation, right? This CKS preparation, and go to the fourth one, and here set up appropriate OS level security domain using PSP is nothing but a pod security policies. So 4.11. So we will be, and its documentation is this, right? I clicked here, right? This is a pod security. pod security policies, right? Say for example, I'm in a Kubernetes cluster, kubectl get pod, nothing is there, right? Now kubectl run web, I'm just running a web pod, just normal simple pod, kubectl get pod, right? So pod security policy, this pod specific security of policy, that's it. So everything is about the pod security policy, everything is about the pod. Now what is this pod security policy? Pod security policy, first of all, is a global resource. What exactly that means, right? If you look at a kubectl API resources, there will be a bunch of API resources, right? Here bindings, endpoint, config map, right? Nodes, pods, services, secret, service account, these are the all are the resources. Same likewise, there is a pod security policy. Here this is, and pod security policy is a, here it's a, sorry, pod security policy, it's a false, nothing but what is false? Namespace equal to false. That means it's a global resource, right? That's one point we need to. That means whenever you wanted to apply a security policy for this pod, it has to be a global. That's what it means. Second is, what exactly this pod security policy will does? Of course, the name suggests pod specific security it will control the security sensitive aspect of pod, right? Then second, what exactly this pod security policy? This will, pod security policy is nothing but, it's a policy is nothing but set of conditions. If you put some certain conditions and apply to the pod, so that this pod will leverage, pod will adopt, right? That's what the, so, and who will configure these pod security policies? Only administrator can configure. Why? Because it will require it, so it will require some of the API related administrative operation. What exactly that? So when, if you wanted to use the pod security, first step is you have to enable at kube API server level before using it, right? How to enable that, I will show that. Next is, pod security policy can be authorized using RBAC. Means if you wanted to apply a pod security policy, that will be achieved by using RBAC. That is the only way you can achieve. How? And we will see in the next slide. So first of all, we'll try to understand what is this pod security policy, how it will, right? So let's go to the next slide. Pod security standards. So if you would say, yes, our main topic is the pod security policy, but what are the pod security standards, right? So if you look at the documentation, right, scroll down, there are the standards, the link is given, scroll down, yeah, pod security standards here, right? So these are the very big documentation, right? Here if you look at here, there are, if you wanted to secure a pod, there are 3 different ways you can secure. One is the privileged, means here say kubectl get pod, right? So I have my web pod is running already, right? This web pod may be privileged pod. What is this privileged pod? That means it may be unrestricted. That means it's full, it has a widely open, it's a full administrative right. Means with this pod it can do anything in the cluster, so it doesn't have any limitation. So who will use such kind of pods? For system and infrastructure level workload. If really this pod require high privilege rights, then you have to go for it. Otherwise, don't go for this full privileged pod. Second is a baseline. Say I have a kubectl get namespace. I have a say kubectl create namespace dev. I have created a dev namespace, right? Kubectl get namespace. Then my dev namespace is created. So if whatever the pods created in this dev namespace, it has to follow certain guidelines. There are some baselines, right? Then you can define some baseline for all the pod is going to create. So once you set the standard as a baseline, every pod any developer will create, then automatically that will have such kind of rights, right? So for whom it's better, and operators and developer, right? For non-critical application, of course, baseline means it has some restrictions, right? Some settings, right? Then third one is a restricted. So if you want a pod should be highly restricted, it doesn't have any much access, right? Only very very little access. Say in my production there is some pod is running which is the payment related, or maybe something critical operation, maybe blockchain or anything, any critical operation, then you can restrict like anything and only enable whatever you want. How it's possible? By using a pod. So these are the three different types, and if you wanted to see in the documentation, right, pod security standards, baseline, and baseline can be host network, host PID, right, and host IPC, and you can set the other Linux capabilities and all you can set, right? And if it is restricted, then you can restrict the all this kind of, you can restrict the certain these are the properties, you can restrict the fields, you can restrict as a non-root user or root user, right? And there are many pod level settings where you can apply. So let's see one by one. Now how to enable that, right? In the previous slide we see, so is a very simple. It's in the Kube API server. We need to enable admission plugins. Here you need to add a comma separated. How it will be? Let's see. See, I am in a Kubernetes cluster. So kubectl get pod -a all, right? So now if you look at here, Kube API server master node, right? Here kubectl describe pod, and I wanted to describe this one, and in a kube system namespace, right? Kube system namespace, and if I describe, right, if you look at the command enable admission plugins, so already there is a node restriction. This is a default admission plugin which is added to the cluster, but here I said in my previous slide there are many, right, many built-in admission controller. If I wanted to use this pod security policy, I have to add as a comma separated. That's the first step we need to take care, right? So here it's not there, so we have to add. So how to add it to this Kube API server master pod, right? It's a static pod, so we need to go inside the master node, vagrant ssh master. I am going inside my master node, right? And yes, and I will log in as a root user. And where is this particular Kube API server pod is located? It is at C Kubernetes manifest, right? Here ls-l, right? There is Kube API server.yaml. So carefully edit this Kube API server YAML file and scroll down. This is a pod. Yes, of course, Kube API server is also one of the pod. And here is a enable admission plugin. So here is a node restriction, right? So here after node restriction, just comma and pod security policy. So instead of typing, I will just simply copy, right? So that's a better good idea. Don't type because we may do the mistakes, right? Pod security policy, right? And just and after that just save it, right? So how to save that? :wq, right? Now I am done, and if I wanted to check that, how to check, right? So clear cat kube API server.yaml. Just I wanted to make sure whether it's added or not, right? Added, perfect. Now I will go out of my master node and I will come back kubectl get node, right? My node is not accessible. Why? Whenever you modify Kube API server.yaml, it will take some time in the sense just a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes it will take, right? If I do that, yes, now it's ready now. So how do I check that? Same, let me do that kubectl describe pod Kube API server, right? I will run the, no, it still is kube get pod, right? See, my API server pod still not yet up. It will take a time. So let's go to the, and how to disable, just remove this, whatever with the entry we added, that you need to remove. That's very simple in order to achieve what? Pod security policy, right? Now next, how this pod security policy looks. this is a simple YAML file which is in a declarative. Here the name, my pod security policy name is example. Here what I am doing in the box, I am defining a one policy which is SE Linux capabilities are run as any. Usually people won't put, but just an example. And supplemental group any, run as a user any, and volumes any. Something like that I will set a some standard. So, and there is another example, same pod security policy which has a more permissions, which is a privileged. What I am doing here privileged equal to false. That means do not allow pods as a admin. Here, if you apply this pod in any namespace, then all pod will you can use as a privileged. Or allow privilege escalation, yes you can do. And what the port, what the run as a user, maybe you can define run as a user 1000. So whenever you use the pod, then you have to use as a 1000, otherwise it won't work. Something like this is the base criteria, basic rules kind of, right? Another pod security policy, right? This is a restricted, more restrictions. What are the restrictions here? Privileged equal to false, no privileged rights, and volume, config map, empty directory, projected, secret, download app. Only these. Host network is false, host IPC false, PID is false, and run as a user must as a non-root. So lot of restrictions. So if you apply such kind of restrictions to a pod, means here kubectl get pod, right? There is a web pod running, right? kubectl, right? Get pod web -o YAML, right? So here if you look at this is a default service account is applied. So this is a web pod, right? Web pod, it has a service account is default service account. This service account I have not given. This is by default applied. From where? From the default namespace. Where is the service account? kubectl get service account in default namespace. This is the service account. And if you look at the describe service account in default namespace, its name is also default, right? This is my service account, right? That means this web pod is operated by this guy, right? So here security context is blank. If you put the security context here as a privileged equal to true, means I can go inside this pod and I can do any admin operations and I can hack the machine and all. That's what the PSP, right? I hope you understand this, right? Now next is how you implement this pod security policy, right? First, in your Kubernetes cluster, first you will be creating a pod security policy, right? How to create? Just go to the documentation and there are several pod security policies are there. It's a simple pod security policy, right? Simple one. Now the second is create a service account in any namespace. So kubectl get namespace, right? I wanted to implement pod security policy only in the dev, not all, right? Say kubectl create namespace. I have a UAT namespace. kubectl create namespace, production namespace. Let's consider, right? So now kubectl get namespaces, dev, UAT, production. Because this dev namespace is accessed by the developer, UAT namespace accessed by the leads and whoever the UAT testers, and production namespace is accessed by the operations team. So whoever the development team should have a strong access rights, means strong, not strong, the least access rights to the dev, not to these guys. So how to set that? You need to create a service account in the namespace, in the dev namespace. Then third is create a cluster role, and for this pod security policy, and then create a role binding. Why the role binding? Whatever the service account you create, that service account, this cluster role, everything you will bind it here. Means whatever the top 3 will be included in the cluster role binding, as simple as that. Now next is create a pod and set that service account. Set that service account is what? Here if you look at our previous, right, this web pod, right, this web pod, here the service account I did not set, right, but we can set manually of this guy. So let's do that in a demo. Now what is a cluster role binding? So first we will be creating a dev namespace. Yes, I have created already dev UAT production and all, right. This is the dev. Then second is create a service account which is in the dev namespace. So let's do that. kubectl create SCA nothing but it's a service account name, right, and I will give it as a dev service account. It's very simple, easy to remember, and in a dev namespace only, right. Now kubectl get service accounts in dev namespace, default service account and dev SCA, right. Now I have to create a one pod security policy, right. So I will create this pod security policy. How to do that, right? So let's go here, right. So I will try to copy this. Here is already ready made. Just I will copy this pod security policy, right. So I will go to the command line vi psp.yaml. Just I will keep it as a simple name, right. And example is what I will give the some easy to remember example. I am creating a pod security policy for dev. So dev PSP, simple to remember, right. And just remember here what the setting we have done, privilege equal to false, right. So right, kubectl apply -f PSP YAML, right. Now pod security policy is created. Just forget about this warning, I will explain what exactly it is. Now how to check? kubectl get PSP -a. So dev PSP just now I created, right. So let's describe kubectl describe pod security policy of dev pod security policy. Okay, now see here, allow privilege equal to false, allow privilege escalation true. I can escalate but privilege is false, and host network and host port and all nothing I defined, just for testing purpose, right. It's simple. So right now our pod security policy is created, right, which is not this way but I taken from the documentation. Now the third step is create a cluster role, right. Cluster role with what? Cluster role will have a API group of policy, resource is a pod security policies, verb is a use, and resource name is, what is this resource name? Pod security policy name. So let's create this cluster role. How to create a cluster role in a easy and way? There is a command which is imperative command. So kubectl create cluster role, right. What is the cluster role name? Dev cluster role, or just give a dev cluster role. And what is the verb we are using? Verb is here use. So if you go to the documentation, it's clearly is given, right. Yeah, right, here is a given, right. So basically here, and if you scroll down there are more as well is there, so need not to worry, there are many more, right. So you can, so verb equal to use, verbs equal to use, right, verb equal to use, and where is that? Resource, SOUR resource equal to, what is the resource? Pod security policy, right. It's a pod security policy. And the next one is -, resource name. What is the resource name I have to give? Which is a pod security policy here, right. So as simple as that. Here what is the API group policy, pod security policies, and use and resource name, right. So is given, right. So I will just enter. Oops, I think it's a capital N. Oops. Oh sorry, resource -name, sorry, my bad. Resource -name, right. Perfect. Now this is created. How to check that? kubectl describe cluster role, right, which is dev cluster role, right. It's dev cluster role is created, and pod security policy, and which is a, what is a pod security policy I have mapped, which is dev PSP, which is I created in the previous step, right. And verb is use, So this is a run, and cluster role is a global resource, right? Now we have to apply to the dev namespace. How do I do that, right? So next, let's go to the presentation. Next, we need to create a role binding, right? So role binding, you need to map this role, and service account is this guy, right? You got it, right? So this is a cluster role. Where is a cluster role? This one. So this one will be mapping here. Service account is this guy. So now kubectl create role binding, right? So what is the role binding name? Dev role binding. So I'm in dev binding, I'll something like that simply. In where I wanted to create in the dev namespace, right? In the dev namespace. And so role binding syntax are here, right? Then role. What is the role here? What is the role name here? Dev cr, right? So role equal to dev cr. Then next is what? Service account. So we need to specify the service account. So service account equal to, how to specify the service account? Namespace colon service account name. Namespace is what? Our dev colon. And what is the service account name? If you scroll up, right, I have specified service account as dev SCA, right? So dev hyphen SCA. So let's open a new duplicate tab. kubectl get service account in dev namespace. Let's make sure dev hyphen SCA, right? So dev hyphen SCA. So here I am creating a binding in dev namespace, dev cluster role and service account. That's it. Now how to check that? kubectl, sorry. So if you don't know this particular command, how do I know what command to pass? Just simply, right, kubectl create a cluster role, and then after that what you will be doing is kubectl create cluster role and hyphen h. Then it will give me the good example. kubectl create cluster role pod reader verb, and how to specify the service account. Here you just scroll down, right? Here it will be there. Resource names, how to specify, or else you go to the documentation and there will be a clearly examples are there. So need not to worry. So now we will be describing kubectl describe cluster role binding in, sorry, role binding, not cluster role, right, in dev namespace, the only dev binding which we created, right? So now 1 2 3 4 all are created. Now next step is I have to create a pod. So let's go back to the what we have done so far. So I have created a PSP in a dev name PSP and service account in a dev namespace and a cluster role and cluster role binding. Now I will create a pod and test, pod with the service account and test. So what I will do is here, right, kubectl get pods in dev namespace. So none of the pod. So I will try to create a pod. kubectl run web 1 hyphen image nginx and hyphen dry run equal to client oml and pod.yaml. So I will try to create a pod manifest file rather than, so then it's created, right? So now vi pod.yaml, right? Now this pod yaml file, right? So what I will do is I wanted to apply a service account. What service account? If you go to the another tab, kubectl get service account, right, in dev namespace. If I create a like this, then automatically default service account will apply, but I don't want that. I wanted to use this guy. So how to check that? So I wanted to check, I wanted to add here. So what we need to add? A service account I need to add right here. So sorry, maybe I will cancel and reopen the file, right? So here I have to add a service account. Service, in order to add a service account, what I have to do is I have to know its syntax. So kubectl explain pod, right, in the pod dot spec, right? So if you look at that pod dot spec, right, on the under pod dot spec there is a field called RS service account. See, this is service account. This is at the pod level, so which means here, right, after this DNS I will paste it here. Service account, what is the service account name? Which is, sorry, here dev SA, right? So basically here dev SA, and restart policy, I don't want that, let's keep it simple, right? So now, so what I will do now, kubectl apply -f pod.yaml. Oops. Oh, my bad. So here namespace I have not added, so namespace equal to dev, right? So now clear kubectl apply pod now is created. So kubectl get pods in dev namespace. Web1 is created with the service account. kubectl get service account in dev namespace. So now this, with this namespace, this pod is created. So let's wait and see. Now yes, pod is running. Now kubectl get pod -n dev namespace web pod and -o YAML, right? If you look at this, what is the service account is using dev SA. That's good. Whatever the expected service account, which is what we created. Now we will test the PSP. How to test that? What is my PSP I have created here? My PSP is a allow privilege equal to false I made, right? So here kubectl describe PSP. So allow privilege equal to I made it false, right? So vi psp.yaml. If you look at this privilege, I made it false. So what I will do is I will copy this, right, and vi pod.yaml. I will open a pod, right, and I will change the name to web2. Just I am creating a new pod. Here what I am doing is privilege is I am trying to add privilege equal to true, right? So where we need to add this privilege? In the container level. So here container level, right here. How to add the privilege equal to false? First of all, we need to add a security context. Security context, right, and colon, and after that here privilege equal to I will try to true. Means I will try to create a web2 pod in a dev namespace as a privilege equal to true, and let's see what happens, right? Basically my policy is not allow my pod security policy in the dev namespace if I use this service account, right? So now I will try to create a new pod. So kubectl apply -f pod.yaml. So indirectly I am using a web2 pod here, right? So if I apply here, yes, I got an error, which is good. Here if you try to observe this error from server forbidden, error while creating a pod.yaml, pod web2 is forbidden by whom? Pod security policy. So this is the what we need to make a note. Means I am a developer, right? I am a developer. I am trying to create a pod with the privileged access in the dev namespace by using this service account. What happens? My error is my administrator set a pod security policy to not to run such kind of, which is why he said privileged containers not allowed for the security in a dev namespace. So that's what the unable to admit the pod spec containers security context privileged, right? So this is the what the whole about the pod security policies. So and we have achieved by using the RBAC. So this is the simple step, 4-step process, and we have leveraged. And if you look at the further slide, all the commands are here, and all these commands are available in the documentation, right? And examples, everything is there. So maybe you can try, feel free to, maybe you just try to set a, say for example, you try to set run as a user is basically here you put it as 1,000 and create a pod security policy and try to create a pod by using run as a user 2000 and let's try to see. It will throw the error, same error. So the different criteria you specify in your pod security policy, accordingly the errors will throw. If you do the more restricted and then you try to do some against the whatever it's defined here, it will throw the error. You can specify the ranges. Say you specify the ranges, right? And if somebody try to create the FS group ranges, then so these all are the Linux capabilities, right? So why you use the Linux capabilities in the pod other than hello world and any normal web application? To hack. So basically it will prevent from hacking the machine. Ultimately you will achieve the security. Okay, yeah, that's it for this session. Let me know your feedback in the comments. Thank you all.